morning and welcome to IMA's CMA Candidate Webinar Series. The title of today's presentation is The CMA Exam, Navigating Multiple Choice Questions, sponsored by Wiley. I'm Margaret Lockery and I'll be your host for today's CMA Candidate Webinar. Before we begin, I would like to thank our sponsor, Wiley, for their support with today's webinar. For over 200 years, Wiley has been helping people and organizations develop the skills and knowledge they need to succeed. They developed digital education, learning, assessment, and certification solutions to help universities, businesses, and individuals move between education and employment and achieve their ambitions. With Wiley Accounting, today's students and professionals can prepare for tomorrow's workplace. Wiley's job is to deliver engaging, quality learning solutions and reputable content that drives results and guarantees success in today's changing business world. From the classroom to the boardroom, Wiley is your trusted innovator in accounting. It's a pleasure to have Mary Patterson as part of our program, and she will be serving as moderator for today's event. Mary is a manager of academic outreach at IMA. Hi, Mary. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm pleased to be part of the IMA webinar series, and on behalf of IMA, I want to welcome everyone to today's session. At this time, I want to introduce you to our featured presenters for today's program. With us today, we have Amy Ford. Amy is an accounting instructor at Western Illinois University, where she teaches principles of financial and managerial accounting courses, as well as accounting for managers in the MBA program. Amy is a certified management accountant and won a 2011 Certificate of Distinguished Performance for earning one of the top overall scores on the CMA exam. Amy is the faculty advisor for Western's student chapter of the IMA and was the 2011 IMA Ursula Albers Academic Mentor of the Year. Amy's work experience prior to teaching was at a public accounting firm. Please join me in welcoming Amy Ford.
Thank you, Mary. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to discussing this topic today.
Next, I would like to introduce you to our second featured presenter for today's program, Lisa Bowden. As Senior Director of Business Development for IMA, Lisa works with companies and educational institutions to generate awareness of the Certified Management Accountant credential. Lisa is a CMA and holds the CSCA designation. Earlier in her career, Lisa held various accounting and finance positions at Ford Motor Company, Ford Credit, and IBM Corporation. It's great to have you with us, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Mary. I'm really pleased to be part of today's program.
I would also like to introduce our guest speaker for today's program, Luis Martinez Luna. Luis is an experienced finance professional passionate about the modernization of the Office of Finance, connecting business, strategy, and data. Currently, he serves as Bose Senior Corporate FP&A Analyst, improving business decision-making with data and technology-driven approaches. He leads the corporate planning processes and serves as the finance business partner to the corporate strategy and innovation organization. He is passionate about data and analytics and is currently pursuing his master's in business analytics from Suffolk University with a vision of applying modern capabilities within the office of the CFO. Please join me in welcoming Luis Martinez Luna.
Thank you so much. Really happy to be here and play a role in today's discussion.
Before turning the presentation over to our speakers, I would like to go over the learning objectives for today's program. After participating in this webinar, you will gain an understanding of the content and topics that are tested in the CMA exam. You will also be able to identify the sections of the CMA exam for which you already have a good understanding. And finally, you will be able to explain how to proceed with your preparation plans for becoming a CMA. We're looking forward to an informative presentation, so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Bowden to begin.
Thanks so much, Mary, and I want to welcome you all to our webinar. It's great to have so many of you participating in today's session and showing an interest in learning more about the CMA. So here's an overview of what we'll be covering today. I'll start with some background on the CMA, and we'll hear from Luis about his experience with the CMA. I'll then hand it over to Amy, who will share some sample CMA exam multiple choice questions and answers with you. After that, I'll explain the steps to take to start the process of pursuing the CMA. We should have time at the end of the session to answer some of your questions as well. So let's start with some information about the CMA. The CMA is IMA's certification for accountants and financial professionals working in business. It covers the critical skills and knowledge that accounting and financial management professionals need to have. I'll explain the CMA exam content in more detail on an upcoming slide. It's important to note that the CMA is a globally recognized certification, not a license that is granted by a U.S. state or a country. Someone sitting for the CMA in the U.S. is sitting for the same exam as someone in China, India, or the Netherlands, for example. And we've come to our first poll question, so I'm going to turn your attention over to our moderator, Mary.
Thank you. Attendees should see the first polling question now open on your console. I would like to remind all participants that you may begin responding to the poll questions as soon as they are visible on your screen. You will have about 30 seconds to respond to each of the polling questions today. Our first question today is, do you plan to sit for the CMA exam within the next 12 months? Please select your answer and then click Submit button on the lower right side of the response questions. Now I'm going to turn the presentation back to Lisa.
Thanks, Mary. So I just wanted to give everybody a chance to respond, and pretty quick question there. And that is about what I was expecting. Usually the people attending this webinar are pretty committed to earning the CMA, so it looks like close to 90% of you are planning to sit for the exam within the next 12 months. So we're glad to have you with us today, and we hope that we'll be providing you information that will help you on that journey. So just a little bit of background on, why the CMA was created. To determine the content of the exam, IMA conducts a significant amount of research with financial executives and CFOs. These are people who are familiar with the CMA exam and people who are not familiar with it. What we found is that CFOs feel that they need to raise the competency levels of their employees. Employers are telling us that they hire some very talented people, but they feel that there is a skills gap, and that gap is especially apparent when it comes to planning and analysis skills, which are extremely important. Also, employers told us that they struggle when it comes time to identify advanced or high potential finance and accounting staff for advancement within the organization. Now, the CMA exam is composed of two parts, and they test your fluency in both accounting and finance. The exams are each 4 hours in length, starting with 100 multiple choice questions and concluding with 2 essay scenarios, which are like mini cases. And these exams can be taken in any order, Part 1 or Part 2 first, whichever one you choose. This slide provides a high-level overview of the test topics, and there are more details on the IMA website beyond this. The Part 1 exam is called Financial Planning, Performance, and Analytics. You'll see that it has 6 sections. That first section focuses on external financial reporting decisions, and it covers financial accounting topics such as different financial statements and topics related to recognition, measurement, valuation, and disclosure. Those next three sections, planning, budgeting, and forecasting, performance management, and cost management, cover topics that I'm sure many of you perform in your jobs. It includes topics such as the budgeting process, variance analysis, balanced scorecard, job order costing, activity-based costing, and so on. That fifth section covers best practices and internal controls. And then the final or sixth section is called Technology and Analytics. That section was just added to the exam this year, and it focuses on topics such as data governance, technology enablement, and data analytics. The Part 2 exam is called Strategic Financial Management. It also has 6 sections, and you'll see that it includes some finance topics. Starts off with financial statement analysis. That's where you're calculating different financial ratios, but you're also interpreting them. You know, how are we trending over time? How do we compare to competitors in our industry? Corporate finance focuses on risk and return models and financial instruments. Decision analysis covers things like variable and fixed costs, cost volume profit analysis, sensitivity analysis, and contribution margin income statements. Risk management focuses on best practices in enterprise risk management. Companies need to be prepared to manage risks by identifying them and creating plans to manage them. The investment decisions section covers capital budgeting techniques like discounted cash flow methods and other ways to evaluate investments for an organization. And then finally, the last section focuses on professional ethics. Ethics is such an important topic to IMA as well as to the profession. Now, the content on the CMA exam is very relevant to professionals working in accounting and finance roles. If you were to show this list of topics to a senior leader in finance or accounting, they would tell you that they need employees who have a mastery of these skills. Holding the CMA credential can expand career opportunities. I've heard from many CMAs who've told me that earning the credential provided them with the opportunity to move into a specific part of their company that they wouldn't have been considered for before they became a CMA. And others tell me that it helped differentiate them in the hiring process. Another important point is that the CMA is not industry specific. Professionals who hold the CMA work in all types of companies across all industries and in companies of all different sizes. IMA has awarded over 86,000 CMA certificates to date, and demand for the certification has increased significantly over the past few years. And CMAs also enjoy greater earning power, as you'll see on the next slide. Each year, IMA conducts a salary survey of accounting and finance professionals around the world. For this year, the survey showed that globally, CMA certified accounting professionals earn on average 63% more in total annual compensation than their non-certified accounting peers. The survey tends to show similar results each year. The message from this survey is that CMA certification provides a positive return on your investment, and it's worth your while to become a CMA. So at this time, before we move on to Amy's sample CMA questions, I'd like to have Luis Martinez Luna share some insights with you. Luis earned the CMA in 2018, and I think you'll benefit from hearing about his experience with the CMA certification.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone for attending. I'm going to hit on a couple things today, focusing on some of the questions that have asked broadly earlier and my personal experience. So I want to hit on a couple things. It's number one, some background on why I pursued the CMA. Number two, and some tips that I have based on my own experience in preparing for the exams. And then lastly, how has it been relevant over the years since obtaining my CMA and preparing for it. So first and foremost, why the CMA? How did I land on pursuing it? So I had a mentor in my first job that he used the phrase of, you need to get your dance card punched when it comes to accounting. You need to understand debits and credits is really what he told me. And that stuck with me ever since. And so I wanted to look for a way to supplement my on-the-job learning in the field of accounting primarily with something that was a little bit more formal and that would help me stand out from my peers. At the time, I sort of saw the CMA as a accounting-focused certification, but as Lisa showed earlier, it goes beyond that, right? It touches on the finance side of things as well, and then more recently on the analytical and data skill sets that are so relevant today. On a personal level, I always wanted to have a family, and the reality is that having children is expensive, and so I wanted to find a way that would also increase my earning potential. The CMA has certainly done that for me. And when deciding on what certifications to pursue, for me, I was quite clear that I was not going to pursue a public accounting role in my career, and so I saw the CMA as what I would call the applied accounting certification. And so that really holds true. It really allows you to take the theory behind accounting and finance principles and show you how to apply them, and gives you realistic ways of using the skill sets. So as I mentioned, I wanted to have a family. So when preparing for my studying of the CMA, one of the first things I had to do was coordinate with my wife and understand and set expectations from her perspective, my perspective, as well as my broader extended family. So I would say that one of the first things you want to do when pursuing the CMA is really come up with a game plan for when are you going to study, how long do you intend to prepare for each part of the exam, and then be consistent. For me, that meant waking up really early in the mornings and heading into the office early and getting maybe 2 to 3 hours of study time a few times a week prior to starting my workday. That could be different for you, but having a game plan is key to success. Number two, especially with waking up early or accommodating the other aspects of your life, you want to make sure that you're well rested and you consider all the other obligations that you have, whether that's as a parent, a father, a mother, a brother, sister, whatever it may be. We all play many roles, and oftentimes it's easy to forget the obligations that we have. And then lastly, one of the things that was extremely helpful for me was actually talking to my employer and having them be part of my journey. So not only did they support me financially with paying for some of my preparation materials, but they also gave me flexibility when I needed it. So around exam time, I was able to have some more dedicated time to study and prepare, as well as just have some rest when needed. They knew I was pursuing a few different things outside of the office, and so they were quite flexible. And obviously, if you don't communicate that, they won't know. And then probably what's most interesting, how has this been relevant over the years? I would say that if I were to summarize it in one phrase, is I often get a seat at the table in many discussions simply because of the experience I have and the knowledge I have, because I, number one, have the certification, but the journey that I've been on in getting that certification and the study time that I've spent and the application over the years. And so getting a seat at the table not only allows you to show what you know, but it also gives you a broader learning experience at the same time. And then specific cases, so in supporting corporate strategy innovation at Bose, I support a group called New Business Incubation. And so that's oftentimes paired with evaluating new business models. And one of the things that often comes to the forefront of those discussions is revenue recognition, right? A very important but basic principle of any new business model. So that's one example. And then maybe on the finance side, there's also potential acquisitions that come into play and are often discussed, and being able to take the assumptions, build out a discounted cash flow analysis, but more importantly, with the experience that you gain through the CMA, be able to explain what the analysis tells you and whether or not something is a good or a bad investment. And then probably most recently with COVID, right, we went back to a clean slate approach for planning and approached a zero-based planning effort at the beginning of the crisis, when historically we've been following a quarterly forecast process. So the CMA really gives you the ability to step into different seats, different discussions, and bring something to the table that's valuable.
Thank you, Luis. That was really insightful, and sounds like you've been involved in a lot of different, very interesting projects in your role there at Bose, and we really appreciate you sharing your experience with the other CMA candidates. You made a good point about, making sure that people around you know that you're taking on this commitment, right, and getting your family on board with it, your employer. So those are all really good points. Thank you so much for joining us, and Luis will also be available for Q&A at the end, so if you would like to ask a specific question of Luis, just be sure to note that in your Q&A that you'd like to ask the question of Luis, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible. So at this time, I'm going to hand the presentation. Before I hand it over, I'm going to go to one more slide. Sorry about that. And we're going to have Amy lead you through some multiple choice questions. And during this portion of the presentation, she'll show you some examples of retired CMA multiple choice questions. And you can test your knowledge to see how much you already know about the CMA exam body of knowledge. And we've designed this portion of the webinar to be highly interactive. So please be prepared to answer the questions as they appear on your screen. So I'll hand it to Amy now.
Thank you, Lisa. For this portion of the presentation, let's find out how much you already know about the topics that are tested on the CMA exam. Now, this exam material is academic in nature. The material that's tested, it comes from textbooks and business courses that you took in college. Now, in addition, many of the skills that you use in your job every day as an accountant or a finance professional are tested on the exam. So yes, you can pass the CMA exam. Now, what does it mean to pass? Well, in order to pass the exam, you must score at least 360 out of a possible 500 points. Now, this is total points from both the multiple choice questions and the essay questions. So I just want to reassure you, you do not have to be perfect. You don't have to be able to get 100%. So yes, you can pass this exam. Now we're going to practice with some multiple choice questions. We're going to do 7 questions in today's session. So please respond to each question on the screen as it's presented. And also, I want you to keep score. Keep track of the number of questions that you answer correctly. Now, all of the questions that you're about to see are going to be multiple choice format. And there are no numbers or calculations in this presentation. But please note, there is numerical analysis on the actual exam. The actual exam is a combination of both conceptual, the wordy terminology, definition type questions, and numerical analysis in this multiple choice section of the exam. Now, today's questions are adapted from retired CMA exam questions. There are many different topics that are tested on the CMA exam, and this is only a small sampling of the types of questions that you may see on your actual exam day. Now, as we go through the questions today, it'll feel like we're moving pretty quickly, and we are. We're going to move through this pretty quickly. On the exam, as you pace yourself, you should average about 1.5 minutes per multiple choice question. Now, that's the average for both the conceptual and numerical multiple choice questions. All right, do you have what it takes to pass the CMA exam? Let's find out. All right, here is our first sample multiple choice poll-in question. Now, as a reminder, you may begin responding to the poll question as soon as it's visible on your screen. You will have about 30 seconds to respond to each of the polling questions today. So this question says, a corporation acquires a 30% voting interest in another corporation. In this situation, the long-term investment is generally accounted for on the investor corporation's books using which of the following reporting methods? We have lower of cost or market, cost, consolidated, or equity. Now, please select your answer and then click the Submit button on the lower right side of the response options. In Part 1, candidates will be tested on financial accounting concepts. This section requires knowledge about the preparation of the financial statements and recognition, measurement, valuation, and disclosure of financial statement items. So again, I said this is going to move fairly quickly, so I'm going to close this first question and let's see the results. All right, the overwhelming answer from our attendees today is D, equity. And I think we're off to a great start because that is the correct answer. That 30% voting interest in another corporation, that would require the equity method. Let's move on to our next question. This comes from Part 1, and this is a performance management question. A favorable materials price variance coupled with an unfavorable materials usage variance most likely results from A, machine efficiency problems, B, product mix production changes, C, the purchase and use of higher than standard quality materials, or D, the purchase of lower than standard quality materials. Now, the CMA exam covers topics such as variance analysis, responsibility accounting, transfer pricing, and performance measures, such as return on investment and residual income. Now, these topics are great examples of how a candidate needs to be able to understand the topic and answer conceptual questions, as well as understand the calculations and be prepared to do those calculations on the exam. Now, for example, this multiple choice question is a variance conceptual question. So in terms of calculations, could you calculate all the variances? So for direct materials, we're speaking of here, for direct materials, could you calculate the direct materials price variance, the direct materials quantity or usage variance, and the direct materials spending variance? Could you do those calculations? That's what we're looking at in addition to this type of conceptual question. All right, so let's go ahead and see how you did with this question. All right, so the purchase of lower than standard quality materials was the overwhelming answer from the majority of our candidates here, and D is the correct answer. So you have a favorable price variance. Let me explain this a little bit. A favorable price variance means that you paid less than you were supposed to. Your actual price is less than your standard price. But you have an unfavorable usage variance. You used more than you were supposed to. So when would that happen? When would you pay less but use more? If you purchased a lower than standard quality material, you got a deal, or you got a new supplier that had a lower price, we find out that it's a lower quality, and that would be how we could have this combination of variances. All right, let's move on to our next question. This question is from part 1 as well, and this comes from cost management. Allocation of service department costs to the production departments is necessary to control costs, coordinate production activity, determine overhead rates, or maximize efficiency. So remember, one of these is correct. In this cost accounting section, candidates must demonstrate an understanding of cost accounting terminology and measurement. So in this area, you should be familiar with job order costing, process costing, activity-based costing, and life cycle costing. These are all tested in this section of the CMA exam. Overhead costs, supply chain management, and business process improvement are also included in part 1. Okay, so this is a pretty short question. Take another couple seconds to submit your answer. Why do we allocate service department costs to production department? All right, let's see the answers. Wow, you guys did great on this question as well. The correct answer is C. Almost 70% of you selected C. It's to determine overhead rates. So we have to be able to apply overhead to our finished product. And so service department costs are allocated to the production department to determine overhead rates. Great job. You're doing great. Again, keep track of how many you got just so you can see how you're doing. All right, here is another question from part 1, but this comes from the section on internal controls. The primary responsibility for establishing and maintaining internal controls rests with the external auditor, management, the controller, or the treasurer. Now, internal controls, these are tested on part 1 of the CMA exam, and I wanted to show you an example of a very basic question, but a very important question. Make sure you understand the responsibilities related to internal control. Make sure you understand the responsibilities of the different members of the team, the auditors, the management, controller, and treasurer. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and give you just a couple seconds here. Select your answer and then hit submit, and let's see how you did. Great job. Again, management is responsible for establishing and maintaining internal controls. So far, as a majority, you're all doing great. Now, I want to remind you that you will not get to poll the members of your team. This is an individual exam. But as a group today, the attendees as a group today are doing great. All right, so now we're going to move over to part 2. So I picked this question from part 2, and this is a corporate finance question. Which one of a firm's sources of new capital usually has the lowest after-tax cost? So we've moved into part 2. Corporate finance is tested in part 2 of the exam, and this is an area where the CMA candidate needs to be able to answer questions on risk and return, long-term financial management, raising capital, working capital, and corporate restructuring. So you have to understand each of these areas of capital. So which one of these has the lowest after-tax cost? Retained earnings, bonds, preferred stock, or common stock? All right, so please select your answer. On the exam, if you're not sure, you should take your best guess. So in part of our testing strategies, and we have a webinar on that as well that Lisa has shared in the webinar series, that when you don't know the answer, could you eliminate some of the wrong choices? You know what it can't be. You could flag questions and then go back to them later. So there's different strategies on what to do if you don't have the correct answer right off the bat. But here it looks like most of you have now submitted your answers, so let's see how you did. All right, so lowest after-tax cost. The majority is correct, bonds. And the reason here is because we said after tax. The interest on bonds is tax deductible. So since we're going to be able to deduct interest for taxes, bonds have the lowest after-tax cost. Now, this is an area with capital where I would practice with calculations. Practice with sample multiple choice questions. Practice with sample essay questions so that you get comfortable with these calculations and concepts. All right, we are ready for question 6. Remember, there are 7 questions, so we're almost finished with our questions here. So in part 2, this is decision analysis. And I have to tell you, decision analysis is one of my favorite areas on the CMA exam. Now, this section includes cost, volume, profit analysis, marginal analysis, and pricing. Short-term decisions included in this section include special orders, make or buy, sell or process further, and the decision about adding or dropping a segment. So all kinds of great decisions that I like to make in this area. Okay, so this question is a make or buy, and then this is sometimes called the outsourcing decision. In a make versus buy decision, the relevant costs include variable manufacturing costs as well as so this is saying what is relevant to the decision: factory management costs, general office costs, avoidable fixed costs, or depreciation costs. So please select your answer. We're looking for what is relevant to the decision. So the question's telling you that variable manufacturing costs are relevant. What else is relevant to this decision? So let's go ahead and close this poll and see your responses. Excellent. Avoidable fixed costs. So for a cost to be relevant, it has to vary between our decisions, and it has to happen in the future. So those are the 2 definitions of relevant costs. So a relevant cost differs between the alternatives, meaning if it's avoidable, it's going to differ, and then it has to happen in the future to be relevant. So great job. The answer was C, avoidable fixed costs. Okay, we're to question 7 in our interactive poll here with our questions. And so our last question is a part 2 question out of investment decisions. The capital budgeting model that is generally considered the best model for long-range decision-making is the payback model, accounting rate of return model, unadjusted rate of return model, or discounted cash flow model. So in part 2, candidates need to understand investment decisions. This includes capital budgeting, discounted cash flow analysis, and the payback method. You should be prepared to do calculations related to these models. So this is a conceptual question. It's just asking you which would be the best model for long-range decision making. So go ahead and submit your answer, and then let's see how the group has done. All right, I'm going to close the poll here. And again, overwhelming response would be discounted cash flow model, choice D, which is correct. So as a group, you guys were 7 for 7. You got all 7 of them right in the group majority here. Now, the reason that this is the best model is for long-range decision making, we have to take into consideration the time value of money. So a discounted cash flow model, using those present value tables, who doesn't love going to the present value of an annuity and the present value of a dollar table to discount the cash flows? That will be the best model for long-range decision making. A, B, and C do not consider discounted cash flow analysis or the time value of money. The payback model, choice A, some of you picked the payback model. You could do a discounted payback model, but it did not specify that. So that's why the discounted cash flow model is the correct answer. All right, so think about your performance. I know as a group you guys did great and you were 7 for 7. How many of these sample questions did you answer correctly? And then I know that maybe you missed a few, or maybe you missed 1 or 2. For any that you did miss, I want you to think about it now. If you took some time and you had time, and Luis was talking about how he prepared, if you had time to review the material and study, think about the questions you missed. Would you have been able to get that question correct after preparing? I really believe that with preparation and studying, you can be successful on the CMA exam. Now, remember, please keep in mind that the questions that were shown today were only conceptual questions, and the actual CMA exam will contain many questions which require calculations, as well as many multiple steps. Maybe you have to do this, then you have to do that to arrive at a correct answer. During today's session, we just wanted to show you a small sample of the types of multiple choice questions that could appear so that you can kind of see how much you already knew about topics that were tested on the CMA exam. Now I'm going to pass the presentation back over to Lisa, who can cover some of the administrative details of the CMA program requirements and the exam testing procedures.
Well, thanks, Amy. I was glad to see so many correct responses. That's really great. Let's talk a little bit about the program requirements. So in order to become a CMA, you do have to pass the 2 exam parts, and you also have to fulfill the education and work experience requirements. The education requirement states that you must have a bachelor's degree from an accredited college or university. It can be in any major. However, most CMA candidates do hold degrees in accounting or finance. Candidates are not required to have already earned their degree in order to sit for the CMA, and in fact, students will sit for the CMA or can sit for it before graduation. They just need to complete their degree within 7 years of passing the CMA exam parts and submit their university transcript to IMA. As for the work experience requirement, candidates need to complete 2 years of professional work experience in order to become a CMA, and a complete explanation of the types of positions that would fulfill the work experience requirement are listed in the CMA handbook on the IMA website. Now, to maintain your CMA certification, you're required to maintain your membership with IMA and to complete 30 hours of continuing professional education, or CPE, each year. The exam is computer-based and is taken at Prometric testing centers. There are 3 testing windows offered each year, and these are the only months when the CMA exam can be taken. You'll see my special note on there for this current testing window. Due to COVID, IMA has extended the CMA exam testing window through November 14th, so it normally would end on October 31st, this Saturday, and it will be extended through November 14th for this year. CMA candidates schedule the exams on their own and at their own pace. Some candidates will try to complete the exam very quickly, perhaps one exam per testing window or both exams within 1 year, while others will take more time. But on average, most people take about 12 to 18 months to complete the 2 exam parts, and that's even for very busy working professionals. Now, there are some administrative fees associated with becoming a CMA. The first step, of course, is to join IMA. The next step, then, when you've decided you're going to commit to the CMA, is to declare your candidacy, and you do that by paying the CMA program entrance fee. And then when you're ready to sit for an exam, you'll register for a specific exam part and a specific testing window and pay the exam fee. Now, if you decide that you'd like to become a CMA, which I think just about everybody on the call here has made that commitment, then there are some things that you should keep in mind. And like Luis was saying, you want to if you set a goal for yourself, you need to make a personal commitment to become a CMA. And what that means is that you should focus on creating a plan that will work for you, and it should include how you'll study and prepare for the exam, when you'll carve out time to devote to studying, when you'll sit for the exam parts, and so on. And you'll want to study exam topics very thoroughly. It's recommended that you purchase study materials that have been created to prepare candidates for the CMA exam. If it's been a while since you've been a student and taken tests, then you'll want to get yourself used to taking tests, managing your test time, and so on. The CMA exam is very challenging. While the amount of study time for each exam part will vary by individual, some general guidelines related to study hours is that it could take anywhere from like 100 to 150 hours to prepare for each part of the exam. And I'd like to share an important resource for CMA candidates. It's called the CMA Candidate Handbook. It's available on the IMA website, and I encourage you to download the handbook and use it as a reference. It includes a lot of details that we've covered in today's webinar, as well as some additional things related to the CMA exam and the certification process. And I also recommend that you check out some of IMA's new free CMA resources available on the IMA website. When you get to this page here on the IMA website, you'll find things like study tips, some sample CMA exam questions, and links to some past CMA candidate webinars similar to this one that have a little bit different focus, like on test-taking tips, as well as information about what to expect at the testing center and how to manage your time on the essay portion of the exam. It also has information about IMA partners that publish CMA exam prep materials. And then finally, I'd like to make you aware of just a second here. I'd like to make you aware of some new videos that from Prometric that are now available for you to view on our website. If you go to this page on our website under the CMA exam and go to what to expect on testing day, you'll find that the first video shows you, what you're going to expect at the testing center. And this has been updated to include some COVID-related procedures. The second video provides a screenshot demonstration of what you'll see on the computer during your exam, and I highly recommend that you take time to view both of these videos before you go to sit for your exams. So I hope that you found this session to be helpful, whether you're preparing to sit for an exam part next month or are just thinking about pursuing the CMA. I wish you all the best of luck on the exam.
Thank you, Lisa, Amy, and Luis. I would like to begin addressing some of the questions from our audience members. Let me first remind participants to send us your questions and comments by typing them into the Q&A panel on the left side of your screen. Going through the questions, I think we've had a lot of them regarding the study plan for Luis. So I want to open it up to Luis to talk a little bit about his study plan, how he mapped it out to tackle the CMA exam, whether that was months that he planned it out, and then also how many days or hours did he devote to studying every week when he was preparing for the CMA exam.
Yeah, happy to share that. So it's funny, I actually pulled up my calendar from the time periods when I was studying, and I have some concrete information for everybody. So I started by working backwards with what was my goal. My goal was to get both Part 1 and Part 2 done within a 12-month period. And then I looked at the available exam windows to determine the specifics of that. So it ended up being that I would take Part 1 in October of 2017 and then Part 2 in June of 2018. And so taking the guidance of roughly 100 to 150 hours, I just split the difference and rounded. So I said I'm going to commit to 120 hours of total study time, and I wanted to try to do that within 8 weeks. So that came out to about 15 hours of study time per week, knowing that things may come up, and some weeks it may be less, some weeks it may be more, but on average, I wanted to commit to 15 hours a week for an 8-week period for each part. And the way that worked out for me was, as I had mentioned earlier, I set aside several hours throughout the week, particularly in the mornings prior to work, where I would go into the office early, and I would commit anywhere from 2 to 3 hours, depending on the day of the week, to studying before work. In most cases, that would be roughly from 5:30 a.m. maybe to 9 a.m. It was quite typical for me. And then on the weekends was when I would have longer study sessions. On Saturdays, I would do about 4 hours of study time all in one block. And then I made sure to also give myself some time off. And so on Sundays was a no study day for me pretty consistently throughout each part, because it is important to make sure that you step away from it as well. The other thing I would say that was super helpful for me was the consistency and not having necessarily what I would call cram sessions. I think taking it small pieces at a time and very frequently is more helpful, at least that I found in my own experience, than trying to consume a lot of content at once.
I was just going to add, Mary, I was just going to add to that. I mean, it's obvious Luis didn't take any shortcuts, right? This is not an exam that you can just cram for, in over the weekend or, for 2 weeks or something like that. And it's his schedule sounds perfect. I didn't know what his plan was before, but what he's answered is really exactly what we hear from people, that they do have to put in somewhere between 100 and 150 hours per part to really know the material, to master it so that you go into that exam and you feel very confident when you are faced with the questions. So it's a significant commitment of time, but I mean, just listening to Luis and the type of job role he has and the confidence that he takes to it, it seems to me that it's very well worth it. Thanks, Luis, for sharing those details.
Yeah, no problem. One thing I would add too is...
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, right, it's the part of the reason you want to dedicate the time is you don't want to just do this to pass the exam. You want to do this to actually retain and internalize the content of the material. You want to learn this inside and out.
That's a great point. And, I think of it like when you're learning a language, are you taking a test for the language to get a good grade on the exam, or are you studying the language in order to become fluent in it, right? So
exactly.
it definitely, that is the attitude you want to have, that you want to become a master of this material and not just, pass an exam, right? It's more than just about passing an exam.
Yes, that's great. And can I add really quickly that I think Luis did a great job discussing his plan. And when you talk about the time, though, the time isn't necessarily equal between all areas of Part 1 or Part 2.
Right.
As a student, and I see this all the time with students, we like studying the stuff that we like and that we're good at, because when we do a practice quiz, we do really well on that practice quiz, and that's great. But, for my personal experience, I always tell everyone corporate finance is probably the most difficult area for me, because I hadn't taken a corporate finance course this century. And because I was taking it after I'd been out of college for a while. And so I know when I did my plan, I had to say, okay, I'm going to have to it's not even between parts. It's not even between sections or areas. I knew I was going to have to spend more time in an area that I needed to study, which was corporate finance for me.
That's a great point, Amy. You have to be honest with yourself, right? And we find that a lot when people, they put together a really great self-study program for themselves and they're sticking to it. But you do have to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. You can't just focus on, I'm like with you, Amy, like the budgeting stuff, the costing. I love that stuff, the decision analysis, more of the managerial and cost accounting components. But when you get to something that's outside of your comfort zone, and that might be for somebody with more of a finance background, it might be more of the accounting content, right? You do have to adjust your schedule so that you are spending enough time so that you really are understanding that content.
Great. I'm going to move on to a couple other questions. This came up a few times. Are there any expected changes for 2021 on the CMA exam?
I will answer that, Mary. Thank you. So the answer is no. And let me just give a little bit of background. So I shared the CMA exam content, and you saw that the technology and analytics section was added to the CMA exam in January of this year. There were also a few other small changes throughout the exam, but that was the major one, with a complete new section being added to the exam. And as a best practice, IMA goes out to the market every 5 years or so and does what we call a job analysis survey. And we collect information from a variety of different sources to make sure that our exam is really aligned with the needs of the accounting and finance profession, you know, that we are really aligning it with the skill set that's required. And as a result of the last job analysis survey, the content on technology and analytics was added to the exam. So we don't do that very lightly. Those things all go through our board of the board that governs the certification exam, and we generally do it, every 5 years or so. So there are no exam changes expected for 2021.
Great. And the next couple questions would probably go to Amy. Were the questions used in the webinar today indicative of the types of questions that I would see on the CMA exam?
That's a great question. As I mentioned during the session, these were obviously short enough to fit in our pull-in kind of format. And so these were short conceptual questions. You should be prepared for calculations where you have a data table with, 5 to 10 numbers in it, and then you're having to make a calculation. So while these were great exam types of questions, they were not the only variation. You'll see analysis where you're given a situation and you have to apply a method or a concept to make a decision. And so those would be lengthier in terms of your view. But today were all concepts that would be tested on the exam.
And Mary, I wanted to add something to that as well. So yeah, these were all exam concepts, as Amy said. And I did want to call to everybody's attention, this is one of 3 CMA candidate webinars that we hold each year. And I mentioned that CMA resources page on the IMA website does have links to previous webinars. And this one focused on multiple choice questions, but the one from earlier in the year was on just general test taking tips and strategies. And I do see some questions, Mary, about like strategies to go through the multiple choice, maybe answer the easiest questions first, mark those, and then mark the ones that are hard and require more steps, come back to those the second time through. We do support, we encourage people to use those types of strategies, and to learn more about those, they can just play back some of those CMA candidate webinars to get more information. So if you're getting close to your test date, I do encourage you to check out those other webinars as well.
Great. And regarding the multiple choice questions, are there any dummy questions on the exam or questions that do not count towards a candidate's score?
Yeah, I can talk to that. So with any good exam, there are questions that are sort of being tested out to see if they are good quality questions, that they're worded clearly, that they're performing properly in the exam environment. So there actually are some questions when you go into your 100 multiple choice questions. There are some that are being tested, but you won't know which questions they are. Okay, it's just part of the behind the scenes exam process. So don't worry about that. Approach the 100 multiple choice questions as if all of them are important. You want to answer, give the best response for every single question. Don't be concerned about that, but behind the scenes, that is a part of a high quality examination process.
Okay, and I'm going to take a few more questions. Lisa, we had a lot of questions regarding work experience requirements. Do I have to already have those fulfilled in order to sit for the CMA exam?
Yeah, so great question. So if you do not have 2 years of work experience yet, that's okay. The work experience requirement is for 2 years of professional work experience, but it can be either past experience if you already have the 2 years, or it can be earned within 7 years of passing the CMA exam. So we do see students or people who are very early in their career, just getting started, who sit for and pass the exam parts. And then once we graduate, you want to submit your transcript to IMA so that that's on file. And then once you've earned those 2 years of work experience, there is a form that you complete on our website to submit the work experience details to IMA. So again, it can be earned within 7 years of passing the CMA exam. And if there are any specific questions about work experience, I do want to refer everybody to that CMA candidate handbook. There's a very detailed explanation of the work experience that will qualify to fulfill that requirement.
Great. And can you quickly talk about the calculator requirements for the CMA exam?
Yes, we do always get that question. So there is a calculator requirement, and it is also in the CMA handbook, and it's on page 10. And I just want to mention, basically you can either use a very simple 6-function calculator. That's one that has addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, square root, and percent. And actually, that's what I used, was just a very basic calculator, but I did sit a long time ago, okay, before it was computer-based. And so I use just a basic calculator, and that's fine. You can also use a financial calculator, but it does have to be one of the models that's listed in our CMA handbook. And there are quite a few different Texas Instrument models, and then there are also, there's one Texas Instrument model, the BA2 Plus, and then there are several Hewlett-Packard or HP models. So check out the CMA Candidate Handbook to find the exact models of calculators that you can use. If you decide to use a financial calculator, though, make sure that you are using it for your studies as well as on exam day, so that you're very comfortable using it and that you're not going to have any issues. And they will not allow you to use a financial calculator that is not listed on here. So it has to be one that's on this list. So be sure to check out the CMA Candidate Handbook to make sure that your calculator is on that list.
Great. And one more question regarding continuing professional education or CPE requirements. If I hold another certification such as the CPA, do I have to earn an additional 30 hours of CPE over and above what I'm already reporting for my CPA license?
That's a great question, and we receive that a lot, Mary. The answer is no. So if you, for CPAs in the U.S. anyway, you have usually each state has a 40-hour per year CPE requirement. If you're fulfilling that, you can apply all of those credits toward your CMA as well. So in effect, get credit with both certifications, applying to both certifications. For IMA, our CPE requirement is 30 hours per year, and we just ask that at least 2 of those hours each year be in ethics training. The other 28 hours can really be in anything that improves your on-the-job performance. So we're a little more broad-based in what we accept for CPE credit. And so, yes, you do not have to earn an additional or an incremental 30 hours of CPE. Generally, anything that you apply toward a CPA license, continuing education requirement, would apply toward your CMA as well.
Yeah, can I just quickly add that graduate studies typically also are applicable? I'm living through that right now.
Yes, very good point. And you can pick up a lot of CPE from those too, right, Luis?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, perfect. Well, thank you, Lisa, Amy, and Luis. At this time, I would like to turn the presentation back over to our host, Margaret.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to thank our presenters, Lisa Bowden, Amy Ford, and Luis Martinez Luna, for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us. We're very appreciative that they've made time for IMA and for our audience today. And also, thank you, Mary Patterson, for moderating today's event. As a last step, please be sure to complete the event evaluation survey, which should be visible on your screen. If it has not popped open, please click the evaluation survey icon at the bottom of your screen for access. I want to again thank Wiley for sponsoring today's webinar and thank all of you for your participation in today's event, your commitment to IMA, and your professional development through IMA's CMA Candidate Webinar Series. I look forward to spending time with you again soon when we'll enjoy some more valuable and interesting information through the IMA webinars.